Well, just as Lindsay said, this webinar is going to be about building tools with PowerShell, and it's going to be based off of my latest PowerShell Toolmaking Fundamentals course. So a little bit about me. I am a PowerShell MVP, independent consultant. I do a lot of writing and blogging and webinars such as this, and of course Pluralsight courses. I'm a trainer. I do some on-site training here and there with Pluralsight. I blog quite a bit on adamtheautomator.com, and I'm on Twitter probably way too much. So what I should, my Twitter handle is AD Bertram. So before we get too far, I wanted to mention that this webinar is based off of the latest Pluralsight course, as I said. I'm going to be going over some of the main points of that course and doing a short demo on one of the tools I included. However, we don't have the 4 hours of content that the course went over, so I'll be skipping over a lot of that stuff that was in there. Once you get done with this webinar and are interested in learning more about toolmaking in particular, I encourage you to check out that course where I go into the details of all the concepts I'll be going over today. So people just coming into PowerShell don't immediately start building tools. Tools require knowledge of the language. They require semantics, a lot of the little gotchas that PowerShell is known for. Now this is why the process of building tools in PowerShell is a step in an evolution. The evolution starts at the PowerShell console itself. This is where everyone learns the language. Once they get comfortable with the console, they'll then typically start stringing commands together and executing them one at a time in a script. And then finally, once they've been building scripts for a while, they'll typically build tools. So let's discuss each one of these in a little bit more detail. The first step in the tool-making evolution is the console. The PowerShell console is home base. It's where your PowerShell journey begins. It's the place where you'll get familiar with PowerShell and what it can do. The console is a learning tool. It's a place where newbies come to kick the tires. The console is also a management tool. PowerShell is not all about just automation. It can also be a way just to simply manage something from the command line with no scripting required at all. And next, the console is the home of the one-liner. I came from a VB script background, and one of the coolest things I remember about PowerShell was the get content command. I couldn't believe I could just type get content and would actually read the contents of the text file. If you've ever done that in VB script, it's around like 5 lines or something. It's some archaic looking code that's not intuitive at all. You'll see there on the right just a simple example of a text file that contains some text in it. I mean, it's really that easy just to do get content and the name of the text file. So next is a script. Once you get to this part, you'll find yourself writing, just stringing the commands together, which you did do in the console, into a script. Now, tools are technically PowerShell scripts, but for my purposes today, a script is lower on the totem pole. So a script does a few different things. A script solves an immediate problem. Maybe you need a one-off thing like maybe quickly pulling some information off of a bunch of servers or creating some user accounts. You don't really plan on reusing it a lot, or if you are, you think to yourself that you just don't have time to spend on it. You do the minimum it takes to get the problem solved, and you move on. And secondly, a script just gets it done. It has no fluff. There's no fancy stuff at all with this. It's just the bare minimum to do whatever you're doing. The code is probably extremely ugly, but it works. And really, that's good enough for you. You don't care how pretty it is, as long as it gets the job done. A script is disposable because after it's done, it can be thrown away because you're probably really not going to do that again, or at least you don't think you're going to do that again. And next, and finally, what's probably the most important difference between a script and a tool is that a script can't account for many variances. Since a script is written in the moment, you don't really care about it working over and over and over again. You don't really worry about it running in a different environment, on a different computer, or with different kind of inputs. It's coded in a way statically to work right now, and that's it. If anything varies outside of the script environment, which is currently executing in, it'll probably bomb out, which will eventually lead you to the next step in that evolution, which is a tool. So you've been writing PowerShell scripts for a while, and it comes to the point where you feel like you need to build something better. You probably feel like you need something to reuse, so you can quit copying and pasting so much all the time. This will lead you to build tools. Rather than editing your scripts every time you run them, instead you include parameters maybe to pass at runtime, rather than assuming things are going to be exactly like they are when you ran the script for the first time. Maybe you check for that stuff. A lot of data validation, for example. A tool requires putting more thought into your script. So let's elaborate a little on what a tool built with PowerShell actually is, and maybe how you might go about building one. So first of all, a PowerShell tool is built from necessity, much like a script, but it takes it to a whole nother level. Unless you're trying to create some training material, IT pros don't just create tools for the fun of it. I mean, you always have a purpose. If so, they probably just get fired because they're tinkering around too much, because I'm sure you've got a problem somewhere to solve other than just tinkering around with a tool that really doesn't do anything. For example, maybe you might build a tool to provision new employee user accounts and home folders. Maybe you want to build a troubleshooting tool to sleuth through a bunch of logs, text logs, event logs, like that on the server. Or maybe just build a tool to manage your file server to do whatever. Those are the kind of tools that I chose to demonstrate in my PowerShell Tool Making Fundamentals course. But a tool always starts with a necessity. And next, a tool is built to last. So let me ask you this. When's the last time you've seen a flimsy hammer? Hammers are built to drive more than one nail. So why is your script built like that? If a hammer was made out of some cheap plastic, chances are it wouldn't last very long. A proper PowerShell tool is built the same way. It's built for durability. Rather than physical durability like a hammer, PowerShell tools are built with things like error handling in place, data validation, input validation, things like that. They are built so that an unexpected error doesn't just blow up the entire script. They're built with constructs like try-catch blocks for error handling to use PowerShell's built-in capability to throw exceptions when a problem occurs. Error handling isn't so important if you're building a tiny script you only intend to use once. But if you're planning to build a tool, that's another story completely. And tools don't make assumptions. They don't assume that the input is going to be exactly the same as it's going to be today. It limits the amount of interaction the user has with it in an attempt to eliminate as many problematic variances as possible. It doesn't assume anything. It validates and enforces everything possible. And tools have a lot of help built in and are commented religiously. Now, you may be wondering why I would classify these two things in the built to last category here. Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever written a script maybe a year ago, maybe even 6 months ago, and then try to figure out what the hell is going on with your own script you did today? Exactly. We evolve as scripters and tool makers. What we once did yesterday is probably not going to be the same. We're probably not even going to understand what we did that today. You can never have to have too many descriptive comments and help nuggets and things like that in your code. And finally, a tool is reusable. Building a script with parameters it's a tool-making behavior. Parameters allow you to change the behavior of the tool without having to modify anything in the script at all. You simply change a few parameters at runtime, and the script executes as it always does. You don't have to change anything in the script. You don't have to. Once you change things, you may bring in some regression bugs or things like that. You may break something else. So parameters allow you to just make those behavioral changes without even changing the script. So while you're out shopping for your durable hammer, like I just talked about, you probably not buy some $100 power drill just to drive a single screw. Why? Well, you might as well just use a manual screwdriver left in a drawer somewhere. You pay for your power tools in your time. You pay for your PowerShell tools in your time. You would spend like 10 hours on a script that you realize you're only going to use once. PowerShell tools are built to be used over and over again in different environments and in different circumstances. They require a lot more time to build than the simple console one-liner or an ad hoc script. But they save you time in the long run. So don't waste your time on something that's not going to be reused. So the first step in building a tool is just figuring out you actually need one or not. This might sound obvious, and sometimes it is, but oftentimes you'll find yourself writing the same code repeatedly without even knowing it. How? Well, it's when the coding times are weeks or months apart. I personally had times whenever I've literally spent days coding on something when I discover a couple weeks later that I already did the exact same thing 2 years ago. It gets worse the longer you create scripts. This is why before I start on any script longer than a couple hours, I'll always do a search, just a cursory search over all my scripts to see if I've done anything like that before. It saves so much time working from a template rather than building it from scratch again. And maybe you're just starting out and you don't have any scripts set aside. You might have been doing a few one-liner commands here and there in PowerShell and feel like you're doing them over and over again. The time is to build a script and to eventually build a tool. It's important to notice these repetitive tasks you're doing. For example, maybe you've got a weekly report you run. You've been doing it for so long, it's just habit, and you never really consider that could be automated. Or perhaps maybe you're just creating some AD users, home folders, mailbox permissions, whatever, for each new employee. Well, you might be doing these things in chunks. Maybe one day HR comes to you and says, I need a new employee created in AD. And then you have a completely other department that's in charge of email or something like that and say, well, a couple of days later, that we need this created. You never really realize that because they're all kind of spread out a little bit. Recognizing this kind of thing and getting better at it will make you a great tool builder, which will save you countless hours of time and ultimately give you that big raise. Well, you do get that big raise every time you save your organization a lot of man hours, right? No? Since I can't hear anybody, I'm just going to say no. Well, we'll just consider it job security then. Okay, tool requirements. For the tool demo today, which we'll be doing one of the tools that I discussed about in my course, I'll be covering the Active Directory Account Management Automator tool is what I called it. So due to time constraints, I won't cover the entire hour and 10-minute demo like I did in the course, but I'll try to cover some of the main points for you. So the first configuration item in the tool requirements is, by default, this is what I want to do in this script. I want to create user accounts in our corporate users OU. So there's a central OU that we just, by default, we put everything in. And next we have a corporate computers OU. So every time I create a new AD or user for an employee, it should automatically go in this corporate users OU. And then finally, we have a default group we want to put users in, and that's the Gigantic Corporation Intra Synergy Group, which I regret the name now. I was trying to be a little bit sarcastic, but now I have to type it in constantly, and I kind of regret doing that. And the default can be overwritten by the CSV entry. So this is a good tool-making behavior to do. You cover the situation that applies 90% of the time. Like, 90% of the time we have an OU that we put users in. We have a OU that we put computers in. We have a group that we put things in. 90% of the time, that's good. So automatically, without typing anything extra, we can automatically take all that off the table. And then after that, we use parameters to override that default. And in this instance, we'll override that by what's in a CSV file. And our next requirement here is the user accounts need to be the first initial and last name. So we have a certain schema that we use, just like you probably do in your organization if you're an IT pro. My name is Adam Bertram. I have a whole ton of A. Bertram user accounts. Now maybe there'll be an Allison Bertram or an Alvin Bertram that came before me. Well, I can't use that, so I need to use a different schema. In our instance today, we're going to use first initial, middle initial, and last name. My middle name is David, so mine will be A.D. Bertram. And here's some of the rough steps that we're going to be going over. First step, we're going to read employees from a CSV, and we're going to say we get this from an HR department or some kind of HR database. Then we'll figure out the username schema that we're going to use. So it's either going to be first initial, last name, or first initial, middle initial, and last name. And if that one's taken up still, we're just going to go ahead and error out. Then we'll go ahead and create the user account. And that user account should go in the corporate users OU, and then also in that AD group. And then I already told you about that one. And then finally, we're going to pre-provision the computer account. This isn't really typical, but I've seen some instances where the workflow of the business defines this. This is when a new employee comes on board, and part of the provisioning process is they get a new PC. And the help desk doesn't have permission to actually join it to the domain. So what happens is we get the computer account created ahead of time, and then once the computer is named that, they can just go ahead and roll it out and be good. Okay, so we'll start the demo, and the rest of this webinar is just going to be all demos, so no more slides. The material, all the slides and the demo scripts and everything should be available at this bit.ly link here. I've had mixed success with this, but if this link doesn't work, which I hope it should, you can just let me know, send me a tweet on Twitter at AD Bertram or whatever, and I'll get back to you. Okay, so let's start the demo. And Lindsay, does this look okay?
It looks good to me.
Okay, all right, just checking. Okay, the first example here, we're going to be using an example of a script. Now, this script is going to have nothing fancy in it. We're going to be doing the minimum it requires to get this going. So the first part is I'm importing the employees in the CSV file. So let's just go ahead and do that, and I'll show you the contents of that. And you'll see I have two employees in here, Adam D. Bertram and Joe E. Murphy. And then in this CSV, there's a user OU section. So for example, you see here on my AD Bertram, I have no user OU. So I should just go in the default. There's no specific OU that I should go in. But in this one, in Joe, he's in this some other OU here. So these are the attributes of the CSV files. And I can't really do this one at a time in this for each loop, but what we're going to do here is we're going to loop through every one of these employee files, or employee rows in this CSV. And then we're going to go through that whole process that I just told you about. So just give a real quick introduction here. There's a few bad things that we fixed in the tool that we're going to be talking about in a minute. So like on this one, the username here, this is a script. So this will work because I'm checking the first initial and last name here. But I'm not doing the scheme change. Now you could do this in the script, and there's really no validation either. So like what if this username is taken? It's probably just going to bomb out. They're going to bomb the entire script out. It's not going to work. So through here, we're just getting some, establishing some parameters that we're going to feed to new AD user here in a minute. Nothing special in here. We're just grabbing off all of the CSV entries. And then in here, the password is in clear text. And as I said here, we're not going to solve this in the webinar because it's another topic outside, another PowerShell topic outside of this. But in here, you probably shouldn't have the password in clear text, and it should be a parameter as well to the user, to the tool, which I'll show you about here in a minute. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Here's that overriding the default that I told you about. If the employee if there is a user OU in the CSV file, then use that as the path parameter here to the new AD user commandlet. So this will go ahead, and my lab is lab.local. But as I said, what if we need another domain? This will only work in the lab.local domain. What if we're going to run it in lab2.local or lab3.local or something like that? It's going to bomb. You're going to have to get in here and fix the script manually. So let's go ahead and collapse this. And then we're going to, once we create the user account, we're going to add it to our default group name. Oh, here, group name is in the script. You should not have any static entries like this. This should be a variable of some kind. Again, if you want to, maybe your company gets bought by somebody else and you need to put another group in here, you're going to go have to in here and change it. You're going to maybe typo something or change something else on accident, and it may bomb out that way. And finally, we're going to create the computer. And again, a static path again. What if our domain changes? Well, what if our OU changes? These all should be parameters. But I'll show you that this does work. So let's just go ahead and run this. Right, so ran, and let's run these here, and we'll just verify, that it all ran. So this is the first user I created, was Adam Bertram, and then these properties, I'm just getting the properties as defined up here. So I only want to see, initials, department, all the properties that we were supposed to change in the CSV. And you'll see that it did create everything exactly like it should. We can go over here again to the next one. Joe Murphy populated it exactly like it should. The default group, we have J. Murphy and A. Bertram in there. So the script does work. And the same thing with the computer account. We have the Adam computer that was in the CSV, and just going over that again here. Do we have computer name, Adam computer? Right. And then we'll just do Joe computer here. He's the same way. He's in the appropriate OU. Now before, that is the script approach. And you can see the script did work. Right now in this webinar, the very first time we run this, it's going to work just fine. I mean, you did the homework and you made it work. But the problem is when you run it again. Okay, well, let's try to run it again. See all that, the red error? The specified account already exists. Specified account already exists. Specified account already exists. This is just a sample of what you can see. Once you run it again, you really have no idea how it's going to react again. You run it again, it's going to have the same error messages. It doesn't account for all of that stuff. All right, so I'm running this on one of my labs here, so let me restore the snapshot, and we'll get back to where we started with, and I'll give you an example of the tool. The demo machine is not that great at the moment, so we'll just take a few more seconds here, and hopefully it'll work, and the demo guides are participating, or helping me out today. Wait for it. Okay. So that was the script. Go ahead and use the tool. Now here is the next evolution in this exact same functionality. This script does the exact same thing as our other script did. And I want you to show an example of what I would call a script versus what's a tool. Once you get to a tool, you're taking it to a different level completely. Notice in the script we didn't have anything here. We didn't have the commandlet binding keyword. This makes the script or a function, quote unquote, advanced. Now, if you're not familiar with advanced functions, there's a lot of good content in the Pluralsight library for that stuff. But needless to say, it gives you a lot more functionality and a lot more control over what your script does. And next, you notice in the script, everything is statically put in here. So like C users, CSV. Well, here in this script, we have parameters. And since it's an advanced function, we can use the parameter here and we can enforce things. So if we try to run tool.ps1 without a path to a CSV file, for example, then it's just going to bomb. We require the minimum amount of information that we can to get this done. And also, we have a validate script attribute here. And in this instance, I'm doing a test path. So what this is doing is, this is testing to ensure, well, sure, you've provided the path to the CSV file. Well, prove it, it's there. Even if you provided it, you could do something like Z drive, some folder that doesn't exist, /blah-blah.csv. It's going to bomb down here later in the script, or in your tool here, that that you can't account for. You need to account for all this stuff as early as possible. And what I found is this validate script, I use this all the time to test different scenarios. There's a lot of different options in here to do with parameter validation if you wanted to, but validate script is one I use a lot, especially around CSV files, or maybe if you have a computer name in here, I do test connection, that sort of thing. You need to test for all this stuff as soon as possible. And then in this tool here, I chose to use a function script. And this function script, which is this big long path, is just a PS1 file with a bunch of functions in it. And I'll show you this a little bit in a minute, but this is the PS1 file with all these different functions. So I have two of them in here because I chose to make these into functions because we're gonna onboard more than one employee, more than one employee user account. We're gonna onboard more than one computer, and rather than having to duplicate the code or worry about fixing different instances of where an employee gets a new one gets changed or something like that, you always want to create common things, common code snippets that you're going to be running over and over again inside of a function. So that's what we're doing there. So we're specifying that function script, and again, we're doing a test path in case it doesn't exist. And I have this collapsed here, but first thing I wanted to show you was this try catch. This is error handling. Back here in this example, this script, if something happened in this in here somewhere, the whole script would bomb. There's no error handling at all. What are you going to do? Like this new AD user, this could throw an error. It's just going to throw an error, and you're not going to account for it. You need to handle and assume and try to predict all these different errors that go on. So what's going to happen in this try catch is it's going to do whatever I'm going to do in here, and then if an exception or error is thrown, it's going to come back here and just write an error. But you can do anything from here. Maybe you're expecting some kind of error to come out of here. You can put in code and really account for that and handle that any way you want. So we'll go down here a little bit in this try catch block here. And the first part I wanted to show out was this dot sourcing. Now, as I mentioned before, this moves a lot of our functionality, a lot of our common functionality into another file here. This gets everything out of your main script. So a good tool making practice is to compartmentalize or modularize your code. You don't want all your code, this enormous monstrosity of the script, all in just one single little script. You want to kind of break that out some, and there's a couple ways to do that in PowerShell. One, since I'm not going to go over modules in this webinar, was I just showed the dot source. And whenever you use a dot source, this brings in all these functions into this script. So this makes available in this script, I can use new employee onboard user. So you'll see here that I'm going to be using the functions later on. So this is actually just bringing in the availability of both of these functions here. And then once we get down here, again, here is the same employees that we're doing here that we did in the script, but you'll see that this was a static assignment here. And here we have employee CSV as a variable. How can we use that as a variable? Well, it's because we have that as a parameter up here. We can pass anything we want to it without ever even changing the script at all. And here is another example of validation. When we ran the script, we had no idea that maybe the CSV file didn't even have any employees in it at all. You can even get as fancy as you want here and say, you can even read it. You could say something like, well, I expect the columns to be first name, last name, whatever. You can actually put in here, I'm not going to put in some pseudocode in here, if first column equals, this, then last column equals this. You can put all this logic in here to even check for specific columns. It's best to get as specific as possible to account for all those different scenarios. You don't want to just, sure, there's a file in there called employees.csv, but maybe it's some kind of binary file. Maybe it's some other kind of text file that's not really a CSV. Good to get as specific as possible. So in this one, if import CSV didn't have any employees in it at all, didn't come back with any input at all, then I'm not going to do anything. So you'll see if there's no employees in that CSV, I'm just going to say, well, no records found, and then it doesn't do anything. In the script, it would have tried to keep hashing through all of its stuff that has dependencies on employees, but it wouldn't work. It would just bomb out in who knows how many different ways. And then finally, I go into the for each loop. And in the for each loop here, I have also another try-catch block. And you may wonder why, if I have a try-catch block up here, why do I need one in here? Well, I've seen some instances to where if something in here throws a terminating error, it's going to terminate the entire for each block. It's going to kill the entire for each construct here because it's just going to break out. If you have a try-catch block inside of your for each loop here, what it'll do is if any code inside of the try-catch block throws an error, it's going to catch it out, and then it's going to continue again. So let's say you try to create an employee account, and there's some kind of exception that's thrown. It'll come out to the catch block, come down, write an error to the screen. It'll write some ugly red text, and then it's just going to go up again and try the next one. That's exactly what I wanted to do. I don't want to fail on, I'm doing 500 AD users, and on AD user 432 fails for some reason. I don't want to just stop all the rest of them while that's happening. So that's another good example of error handling. And here's where I create the AD user account and add it to the standard group. Now you may notice this is same thing we did with the script. We're just defining some parameters here. And same thing with here. Reading the CSV file, if employee.user.ou is there, then, but this time instead of directly passing it to new AD user, you see here on the script, user OU, and then the new user params is the .path parameter here. That's because I'm passing it directly to new AD user, which is an Active Directory module commandlet. Versus here, this is a location parameter. It's different because I'm passing it to my own function, my custom-built new employee onboard user function. And this is another good thing to do because I created an interface between my main script here and the actual core functionality that I was doing it. And I'll show you why that would be a good thing to do a little bit later in a minute. And let's see, again, setting the parameters, same thing, what we did in the script. And then finally, this one's pretty easy. New employee onboard computer, doing the exact same thing. So I'm kind of creating a script in between new AD user and new AD computer. And let's see if I have anything else here. No. Okay, one thing I wanted to show you was, now look at the line count on this. I have 69 lines on my tool here. I go to my script, and I only have 42. Well, the tool is always going to be much bigger than the script. There's just a lot more stuff that goes on when you build a robust tool. And you'll see that the actual functionality of this doesn't even compare to that 69 lines. Now you have a whole lot of functionality built up in this function here and this function here. These pretty much do the heavy lifting. So go over to our dot script. You see that this one is, what, I think we have like 198 lines here. So we have 198 lines plus 69 lines. What is that, like 267 lines or something like that? So it took 267 lines to do the same thing that these 42 did in the script. Now, the novice PowerShell user, or somebody that maybe just has a legitimate reason to, that doesn't have the time, says, well, why do I want to build out, why do I want to just make so much time to build a script that I can do in 42 lines with one that I have to build 260 something lines out? Well, the reason is because that script is a whole lot more robust and efficient and won't fail. So maybe you write this script here that, okay, sure, you just noticed that it ran fine. Well, let's say 2 hours from now, 2 days from now, or 2 months from now, you run into a different situation. You expect it to work the same way that it did. But you never know. The environment is different. Domain controllers may have been swapped out. The domain may have changed. The OUs may have changed. All that stuff. If you create all that functionality ahead of time in a tool, then you don't have to do that again. It's just kind of like automation. You know, in automation, to where when you do a task over and over again, you may be able to do a task in 5 minutes because it's quick. But you do that task for 5 minutes every day, you know, then every week, and then every month, that adds up. Versus if you spent maybe an hour on the same task automating it, then you take 1 hour, and then all the rest of the times it just takes a couple of seconds. You just have to click a button. It's kind of the same thing with PowerShell tools. Okay, so this does the same thing, and I wanted to show you some good examples in the functions that we have here. Okay, number one, kill that. Okay, so the first thing you notice is, wow, look at all the green text. Green text is good. Green text, this is comment-based help. And this is good because, you know, you don't know, even if you're writing this for you're running this for the 10th time and you wrote this script or this tool here maybe, I don't know, a month ago, you're always going to forget, well, what's that first parameter? What does that line up with? Or what was that again? What was that default? Or, you know, what was this? What was that? You always forget what, you know, what you're working with. This is where the comment-based help comes into play. And let me show you just a quick example of that. If you're not familiar with, you know, comment-based help, what you can do is we can go over here and I'll load this in, and then I should have new employee. Yep. So now I can just do help new employee onboard user. And you'll see this function is part of the Active Directory account management tool, blah, blah, blah. Okay, maybe I don't know the, you know, the parameters. Well, I can just do details here. And I can see each parameter, department, it's a string, title, it's a string, and what exactly it does. Now, if you're running this a year from now, you may even remember, well, default group. Ooh, was that the default group I was creating in the one domain or the other one? You know, right now, I'll be honest that the help really isn't the greatest, but I just wanted to give you an example of to be as descriptive as possible. If this was a real production script, I would have been a lot more descriptive of this help. But I wanted to show you that you need to put this help in as often as you can. And next, we're making that commandlet binding. So this is an advanced function. And because of that, we have a lot of our features available to us here. Again, instead of, now again, these parameters here, we were sending these directly to new AD user before. Now we're going to be sending them to my new employee onboard user function. And because of that, we're going to accept the same, generally the same level of, or the same names of parameters, because we're going to be passing these parameters here to our new AD user down here somewhere. I don't want to confuse you with that. But again, mandatory. Before, I wasn't able to set these as mandatory. I know I always want a first name and a last name for every employee user account that gets created. So with this, I can enforce that. I want to always be sure that a first name and a last name is in here. And here's where we're doing the defaults. So as you saw in this script here, this is creating a default for an OU equals corporate users. So as I said in the slide deck, that all of the 90% of the users that we'll be creating will always go into this OU, and I want to override it if if I don't want them to. But over here in this script, you see that there's no way for me to set some OU. If there is no OU, please here. So in my AD Bertram example here, there's no OU. It'll just put it in the default users container in Active Directory, which I don't want it. Then I have to go in and change it again. Or if I wanted to make sure, I would have to put OU equals users, or OU equals corporate user, then every single one of these entries in this VSV file. It's not sustainable. You always want to just default and then override the default if you can. So this is a good example of the default and providing overrides a default. So let me see here. If we go, let me give you a good example of that. New employee onboard user. And then let's say if I wouldn't put anything in, if I don't put anything in here, it's just going to go over to corporate users. But maybe I need it to be in OU equals some other OU, like I did, that other one. I can do that. Then it will put it in some other OU. Same thing with the default group. I put the default group in here. It's always going to go in here unless we override it. And same thing with the password. Don't do this, really. Don't put your secure password in there. Or don't put your clear text password in here. There's ways to encrypt this with secure strings and certificates and some other things like that we're not going to get into here. But needless to say, don't put a password in here. But this is a good example of, again, putting a default password. And here is a good example of support for different domains. So for example, let's say that my domain changes. Well, if I just do this statically in here, it's going to break. Then I have to go in here and change this. Versus in this function here, I set that as a variable. Now, anything that getDomain returns with the distinguishing property, that will be my domain. It's flexible. It's dynamic. It doesn't. It'll just create the user account with whatever domain is currently existing. So it adapts to environmental changes. And here's the username. We're doing the schema thing where I told you about where by default we want to do first initial, last name. Well, if that's taken, then we want to do first initial, middle initial, last name. In the script, we didn't have any of that. Versus here, we're setting the default. So this is my primary. This is the first one I want to use. So we're doing first initial and then the last name. Well, here, I'm actually checking for that. Well, what if it exists? I'm doing get AD user. I'm checking it to see if it exists here on line 72. Well, okay, if it does exist, well then I'm going to know about it. I write a warning. I say the username, whatever you tried, is not available. Checking the alternate. It gives me status messages, progress, like a true application. And then it's saying, okay, well then give me the first initial, middle initial, and last name. Okay, try that one. Try it again. Well, if that doesn't work, then I'm just going to throw an exception, which no acceptable username schema could be created. And this throw verb here, this would actually throw it out in my try-catch block. And since I use a try-catch block, I can do that. It just skips over everything. And again, you want to accommodate for and test for all these situations as early as you possibly can in your tools. And if it is successful and I can use it, I'm just going to write a verbose. Write verbose is a good way to just write, hey, I did this, hey, I did that, just informational messages to kind of give you some progress and feedback of what's going on. All right, and same thing here. If I had my first choice, I'm just going to write a verbose out and say the username is available, just kind of giving me some feedback. All right. So next is the user OU. I'm going to first check, instead of just trying to force it in there, I need to check if it actually exists or not. Maybe the OU isn't even there. Again, I'm checking for that. If I can't find the OU in here, then I'm going to throw it out. Throw the user OU does not exist and add a user there and just stop. And you'll notice that I'm not in a for each loop in this function because this is doing just one single user at a time. New employee onboard user. I'm just doing one at a time. This function here is actually what's going to be in that loop that we're going to call over and over and over again. And again, the same thing with the group. Check for the group. Big tool making behavior is validation, validation, validation. Don't just assume anything. Check before you do anything to see if it, to see if it exists and where it is you think it's going to be. And then finally, we come down here and create the user. Again, we're setting all the parameters again. And then you see here, instead of the static path, I'm using just default password, just using the parameter that we define up here. And a lot of this, that's all the same parameter stuff. Another verbose, just keeping track of where we are, saying now I'm going to create it. And then finally you see the new AD user commandlet reference here. You saw in the script that I just hit my params and then immediately ran new AD user. You saw all these checks and balances, all this stuff I did beforehand, just to make sure that I can actually run new AD user properly. Again, it takes some time, but you would not believe how much more robust and efficient, and it just won't error out near as many times if you build it in this manner. So always put the work up front. And then finally, I chose to add it to the group. So since there wasn't much to adding a group member, I chose to include that in the new employee onboard user function, because normally whenever you do this, you need to think long and hard about it. A function is supposed to be just do one single thing. In this instance, a function just creates a new Active Directory employee account in a specific set of configuration items. I put this in here because I know every single time I create a new user, I'm also going to put it in a group. Now, if you ever know of a situation where you may not put this, there might be an exception here and there where not every user always goes into a group. You don't want to include this in the user function because then you're going to run into having to modify this and take it out. You always want to include. You would want to put this in a different function, or since this is just one line, you may put it over here in in tools, for example, because it's just a one-liner. All right, so that is the user. Let me see. I don't believe we have. I pretty much followed the same strategy for computers as well. We got our help. We've got our parameters. We're setting our default parameter. Computer is a lot easier because they don't have all those attributes to mess with. The domain again. Yeah, we're doing about all the same stuff in here, but you notice this is a lot smaller because we don't have all those parameters to mess with. So we're doing data validation, a lot of validation, bring everything up into parameters, and then finally we're doing new AD computer to actually create the computer in the appropriate DM. All right, so let's see if this works. I think I already reverted my my VM. Hopefully it will work. Oh, see, all right, this is a good example. I didn't do that on accident, but I'm going to pretend like I did do that on purpose. So employee CSV, I can't just run tools. I can't just run this just like I did with no parameters. It's going to force me to put in employees.csv here. And I should have ran it like this. Here is where I'm running the script itself. And you'll see that I'm actually passing parameters to a PS1 file. So I can pass parameters just like I can to a function to a script as well. And I'm defining them over here. And I'm defining them in a hash table. If you're not familiar with the concept of splatting, I could put employees.csv and all the other parameters over here, but since I was kind of running over on the line, I chose to define these all in a hash table ahead of time. So what this is going to do is it's going to pass that employees.csv file called user CSV, and it's going to show verbose. Now that it's advanced, I can use verbose versus script over here. It doesn't matter what I did. I'd have to use a bunch of write hosts or something like that. I couldn't do the nice functional write verbose lines. So let's run this. Okay, for it. Okay. Immediately you notice something a little bit different than the script. You get verbose feedback, exactly what it's doing. Checking if A. Bertram is available. Okay, it is available. Now, okay, and I'm creating it. Now I'm adding it to the group. Checking to see if the group already exists. If it is, okay, it is available. It goes down through, it gives you a nice representation of what's going on here. And I'm not going to go over this and show you that. You're just going to have to believe me that this did exactly like the script did. Now, here's the big difference between a script and a tool. Now let's run it again. All right, we still got some red in here, but I intended that to happen. First thing, checking if A. Bertram is available again. Well, now I put a warning. A. Bertram is not available. Checking the alternate. Okay, now the alternate. Now the alternate username, AD Bertram, is available. So it went ahead and created that one in the OU. Okay, and then it goes checking if AD Adam Computer is available. Okay, well, it says computer name already exists. And this is a red text. I wrote the error because I had it in the throw here. So where did I have that at? Yeah, we're throwing that in the function. But yeah, that was because I intended that. Red text is fine if you intend it. It's not fine if you don't expect the red text to come. I expected the red text to come. And the same thing here again with J. Murphy. The username is not available. J. Murphy is not available. Well, okay, then check it again, J.E. Murphy. So this is a quick example of the tool that I talked about in my course. And really that's about it as far as this tool. The tool can get as advanced as you want. As I said before, I can do a whole lot more advanced validation by checking the CSV columns. I can put in different parameters. I'm sure that if you're on this webinar, you may be seeing some things like, well, why didn't he put this here, or why didn't he put it over there? This is just one way to build a tool. The purpose of the webinar was to show you, and the purpose of the course was to show you how to do things, but also the why to do things, why to build scripts and things that the way that that you're meant to. So let me go back over to the slides here, and pretty sure I don't have any more. Okay, so that's about it for me. Lindsay, do you have anything? Do we have any questions and all that good stuff?
We do have a bunch of questions. I'm wondering if you have about 10 minutes to take a look at some of these questions. We won't have time to go through all of them, but if you could answer maybe 5 or 6 of these, we'll probably go a little bit over if people don't mind staying on.
Okay. Let me see if I...
Oh, and if you wouldn't mind, would you throw your slide up with your bit.ly link on it for the audience to take a look at?
Oh, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Try to make it as obvious as possible, bit.ly/pluralsight tools. Okay. Questions. Are you going to give me the questions, or do I need to look at the questions and the...
I'm happy to read them to you if you'd like.
And let me stop this screen share. Okay. All righty. I can go ahead and read down through. I'll try to answer the ones that I can. Have you answered these, Lindsay, or do I need to answer or try to answer about all of them?
I have answered everything except for the ones that are in the queued questions tabs, starting with Chad's question here. What's the best resource you found? Gotcha.
Okay. All right. So, Chad, what is the best resource you have found for when you're stuck on something? Get help. Help is the first thing that I would go to. So, you can do help space and then the function or the commandlet, whatever you need. The built-in help is wonderful with PowerShell. Besides that, go to the forums, PowerShell.org forums. You can go to Stack Exchange forums. There's a lot of people on there. Forums are a big thing. You want to really get involved in the community. Speaking of that, Twitter is another big one. I'm on Twitter constantly all the time, and I'll generally answer PowerShell questions, even if you don't ask me directly. I kind of monitor the PowerShell ecosystem, I guess, if you were on in Twitter, and there's a lot of people in there that answer your question as well. Vlad, the function for reading CSV files is part of the PS language or user-defined. That import CSV commandlet is built in, so you don't need to build that yourself. If you just fire up your PowerShell console now, you can just type in import-CSV, and it'll work just fine. You don't need to do anything in particular there. Let's see. So, Sean, so you call the PS1 file versus making a function or advanced function. Yes and no. You call the PS1 file to make the functions available to you. Now, technically, you can, with dot sourcing, you can put the PS1 file, put the functionality in the PS1 file, and then run that script in addition to your other one. But that's generally not recommended. In fact, it's not really recommended to use dot sourcing if you're going to use anything more advanced than a few functions. That's when you need to get into modules. Modules are easily they're easily done. They're pretty simple, really, but I didn't go over them in the webinar. But if you start dot sourcing a lot of stuff like that, I would look into modules. Nathan, how do you go about dealing with a person running the tool not having the module installed? This goes back to the modules. There's a lot of different ways to make the module available to user. You can put the module out on the UNC share, on a network share somewhere, and then you can reference the module and the UNC share. You can use a feature called Implicit Remoting, to where you have your modules out on another machine, loaded on another machine, and you can just connect to that machine and bring in all those modules and all those functions together. So that's one called Implicit Remoting. Toby, would you normally create an environment variable to dot source your script directly if it is not the default PowerShell one, so you can use all your functions straight away? Again, this goes back to the modules. I wouldn't, if I'm going to get more than just a couple functions, I would generally write a module. Sebastian, once you're done with the presentation, could you give us a quick run on the tool making course contents? Yep, I will come back to Sebastian. Could you use PS remoting another box to get around it? Yes, Nathan, that's what I mentioned with the implicit remoting. Implicit remoting does use WinRM or PS remoting. Justin, I have a user creates a script that does AD exchange and link. Replication is the biggest issue I had. What do you do to validate account to different systems? Okay, on this one, you can, with get AD user or new AD user, all of those AD commandlets have a server parameter on them. And you can point to your PDCE, so your PDC emulator role. So you know everything is going to come back to that FSMO role. So I would just have dash server put in your PDCE, but don't put it in statically. There's ways, I believe, if you can do like, I think it's get AD domain and then FSMO role holders or something like that. There's a way for you to query your FSMO role holders in your domain, so then you can just always point to whatever your PDCE domain is or emulator. Okay, we'll skip over Williams for until later. Jamie, what tools do you use for automation? PowerShell. That's pretty much really it's pretty much all I use. Me personally, I've been running PowerShell for 6 years now, and I generally just write my own tools if I need them. How do you manage tool lifecycle? And Jamie, nope, that goes with my previous question thing. Vlad, where is employee.user.ou defined? That was defined. That was the user OU in the. See here. Let me bring up my application again here. Okay, Lindsay, can you see that? Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. The employees, the user OU was defined in the CSV file. So I have a CSV file at CUsers CSV, and you'll see that employee or user OU was right there. So I'm grabbing it from the CSV file. Okay. Jamie, do you have any recommendations for systems to share tools and collaborate with the team and to use tools? Again, I don't really understand the question per se. I don't know what you mean by the tools. If you're considering just the tools, my fancy name for a PowerShell script, then that would be you can use source control repositories, GitHub, publish everything to GitHub, share things that way. You can use TFS, Team Foundation Server, through Microsoft Source Control Repository. Or if you just want to format things, just put everything out in a UNC share somewhere and people can access it then. Or, like I said before, with the implicit remoting, you can do that. Or you can even use something like a package repo. If you're familiar with the NuGet and PSGet and options like that, there's a way that people can publish modules up on the PowerShell gallery, and you can share that with everybody, or you can even have your own internal little PowerShell gallery to say, get module, whatever your internal company module is, and then grab it down that way.
So Adam,
Lindsay, why some?
Maybe like one more question, and then I can send you the questions after the presentation as well.
Okay, that'll work. So one more. Let me get a good one. Okay, here's the final one. Eric, Adam, this tool seems to have messages that log to the console as if someone is watching it. However, what about running the script on a schedule and logging the results? This is a good question. This is one I kind of built a logging framework around this. If you go to that link, it'll go to my blog, which has some links to my GitHub repos, and I have one called Software Install Manager, and I kind of wrote an ad hoc logging framework around this. There's a lot of other ones out there there's another one called PS logging, for example, that you can just say write log, and it will send it to the console if you're looking at it, and it will send it to a text file as well, just through the add content command list. So that's another, logging is another good one, and I believe that I went over that in the course as well. So, okay, I guess that's it, Lindsay.
All right, do you have any closing remarks you want to say before we sign off?
Nope, just thank everybody for coming, and I hope you do some cool stuff with the stuff you learned today.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Sorry we ran out of time. Just keep in mind, we do have discussion forums on our courses where you can actually ask Adam questions. Adam is on Twitter. Please continue the conversation on Twitter today as well with hashtag #PluralSiteLive. Again, there is a survey when you log off today. We really appreciate your feedback. If you have any questions for us or ideas for additional webinar topics, please email us at webinars@pluralsite.com. And thank you once again for joining us.